Now, the stock market has fallen sharply. The S&P 500 is now in correction territory, and suddenly there's talk of recession. Tariffs have been on and off and on and off, and now the president says April 2nd is the final deadline for imposing tariffs on Mexico and Canada. The European Union's announced the retaliatory tariffs on U.S. exports to take effect next month. Trump, in turn, threatened 200% tariffs on them. And earlier this week, China began imposing tariffs on American farm products. So, Chad, what is the end game for all this? I mean, is this just damaging the American economy?
Well, yeah. I mean, Trump described the economy as going through a period of transition. Please tell me the difference between that and Biden's claim that inflation is just transitory. There's a quote, Phil Gramm and Donald Bordeaux had in Wall Street Journal op-ed yesterday that said protectionism has an unblemished record of failure both economically and politically throughout American history. And so, you know, about the only defense that I can muster for this is that both Trump and Biden enacted protectionist measures in the name of national security. If you're going to gear up for war, it would make sense to want domestically produced chips or steel or aluminum. But both men favored protectionism beyond that narrow window, that narrow focus, and they did so at the expense of our allies, Trump more explicitly so than Biden. Regardless, terrible idea, terrible for the economy.
Well, CNY.
I mean, right.
Yeah. So Central New York, there's a really good article actually in the Syracuse paper about the economic impact on Central New York. So basically, for every more than $1.08 that is produced in goods in Central New York goes to Canada, and the prison. Shoot, now I'm gonna get it wrong. Prison City Brewing, there it is, in Auburn, has announced that, you know, basically they're looking at potentially $100,000 of additional cost because they get their hops, their barley, and their cans from Canada. And so, you know, the impact here is going to be strong and clear very soon.
Mm-hmm. Well, can't they get their hops and their barley and their cans from American producers?
So, I mean, that is the thing, right? Can United States ramp up production at that level so that it doesn't lead to price increases? I doubt that. Mm-hmm. But I want to have a longer historical perspective, which is that, you know, in the 19th century, we have this American system. Friedrich List in Germany had influenced Quincy Adams and others about this idea that protectionism helps counter large mercantilist states. And at that time, the mercantilist state was Britain. And they went against Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith and said that, you know, we need a protectionist system where we increase tariffs to increase American industries. We invest in infrastructure and a national bank. I don't see Trump doing this for infrastructure. And I don't think, but I think they have this vision that the entire world is mercantilist and taking advantage of the United States, so he's getting this kind of emotional response. Mm-hmm. Now, look, when I read these articles, I see a lot of economists. To be very precise, no economists have any idea about exactly how much price would increase, and I don't blame them. Nobody can really say it. What prices would increase depends upon elasticity of demand, how responsive the demand is to those price increases. But the Federal Reserve of St. Louis had predicted that we'll get to a negative 3% territory, right?
GDP.
Yeah, you know, GDP growth.
So, I can talk about that.
Yeah, and maybe that's a problem, right? You know, if prices increase, people produce less. If people produce less, people lay off. If people lay off, you have unemployment and hence recession. So
yeah.
And that's not counting the direct prices of consumers who are paying the tariffs, essentially. Yep. And there have been research that shows estimated costs of $1,200 per family if you have a 10% tariff on China, 25% on Canada and Mexico. And that doesn't include the rising price of competitors. So competitors at home, as prices on imports go up, they can then raise their prices as well. Yeah. So if you factor those in, that's more like a $2,000 tax on everyday citizens. And let's not forget that he also wants to reduce taxes on the very wealthy, right? So part of his apparent logic of these tariffs is we're going to raise lots of revenue, you know, and he needs to, quote, raise revenue in order to pay for these tax cuts that go to the rich. So it's just going to exacerbate inequality.
I want to address a couple of things that Anirban said. So Trump, like all all mercantilists, they don't see trade as mutually beneficial, and
Yep.
it's just so myopic.
Yep,
And so that's one of his flaws. You had referenced this this central bank kind of prediction on where the economy is going. Justin Wolfers is an economist from Michigan. He wrote a New York Times piece about this yesterday. He's like, don't trust those numbers. That are typical indicators like unemployment and inflation. Right now they're fine, but don't expect them to stay fine for long. So to him, he's talking about these real threats that are with chaos, uncertainty, lack of fiscal discipline, and just completely upending the world order. So don't expect necessarily these negative effects immediately, but they're certainly coming.
I want to take up the negative kind of implications more globally. So I've been paying a lot of attention to Trump's arguments around Canada. He has, as you know, right, been very dismissive about Governor Trudeau, going back to your claim, right, just continually making the argument that Canada should be the 51st state. He has argued that his goal is to basically economically destabilize Canada so the United States can take Canada over. I want us to take that argument seriously because, as you said, right, when you make an argument that initially sounds wild and crazy and like that's not possible, over time you keep making the argument, and suddenly that becomes reality. Honestly, friends, it will not surprise me at all if we see troops on the border in a year.
I had a friend who basically said, look, a man who is willing to reach out and grab a woman without her consent doesn't know boundaries. This Canada thing is a manifestation.
We have to take him literally, and that's the
Yes.
problem.
There's
that
a
people
literally
are not.
seriously issue. Yeah.